Hello and welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got my dad, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio looking spiffy in his red jacket. We're going to start off with our foundational verse like we always do. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord, for he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Comforting verse in today's world, right, Dad?
It is, and it helps us, of course, to live in truth, which always moves from belief to responsibility. What we acknowledge as true is ultimately revealed by how we live. If God is owner and if he established authority, then our lives are no longer self-directed, they are stewarded. Stewardship is the visible evidence of allegiance. Living in truth means recognizing that everything entrusted to us, time, family, influence, resources, responsibility, belongs first to God. We are not owners managing our own kingdom. We are stewards entrusted with what is his. And Scripture never separates authority from accountability. Jesus made this ultimately clear when he said, whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteousness in much. Luke 16:10. So stewardship exposes what rules the heart. What we protect, prioritize, and preserve reveals who we ultimately serve. When stewardship is rejected, authority is resented. When stewardship is embraced, authority is honored. This is why Scripture repeatedly warns that negligent responsibility always leads to disorder. When people live as if they are owners instead of stewards, boundaries dissolve, truth is compromised, and accountability is replaced with entitlement. But God's design is not burdensome, it is protective. A steward does not carry the weight of ownership. A steward carries the privilege of faithfulness. So living in truth means understanding that obedience is not lost, it is alignment. Submission to God's authority does not diminish life, it anchors it. And faithfulness in stewardship becomes a testimony to the watching world that God's order brings peace, not oppression. Stewardship is not about control, it's about care. And those who steward well demonstrate where their allegiance truly lies. Order produces trust, faithfulness produces peace. So today, as we choose to live in truth, let's steward what God has entrusted to us with humility, faithfulness, and joy, knowing that allegiance to him always leads to life.
You know, someone who I think stewards their life well with the gifts and the talents that they have is our guest right here, Dr. Dennis Modry. Dr. Dennis, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for the invitation again.
Are you excited about what's going on with all the lineups in the middle of snow?
Well, for me, it's very, very gratifying to get to this point that we've been working so diligently on for the last number of years to educate the public on the rationale and merits of Alberta sovereignty and how to make that happen, and acknowledge that this is not a right or a left issue. It's a pragmatic issue. Sovereignty benefits everybody. And it's noble to pursue sovereignty because you're pursuing self-determination, you're pursuing your goals and aspirations, freedom and prosperity, a better life for you, yourself, your family, and your retirement. And so, how can that be a bad thing when you're protecting your faith, your family, and your culture along with all of this? So this is extremely gratifying, and it's wonderful to see. And we've just started this petition process, and these lineups to sign the petition to obligate the provincial government to hold a referendum on sovereignty is very rewarding. But we remember that this is a milestone. The milestone is that where we've come from to this point is the next phase, getting the petition signatures. And of course, the next milestone will be winning the referendum, and the next milestone will be negotiating sovereignty subsequent to a successful referendum. So, but this is a stage along that process. And even though our threshold is only 177,000 signatures, we want to make a statement. We want the public to understand that the majority of the public is in favor of sovereignty, and we would like to see if we can get well over 1 million signatures on it. It harkens back to what Ralph Klein used to say, find a parade and get in front of it. And I think the Premier and the provincial government will be rather somewhat compelled, I would say, if they see that we have well over 1 million signatures compelling the referendum. And maybe we'll even hit 1.5, which would be a winning target, even in a referendum. So
it sure doesn't hurt trying to get signatures for sovereignty when we have our prime minister trying to make agreements with communist China and, trying to make that thing happen. It's like, yikes. What are we doing?
Well, you bring up a very good point. And that is, it sort of harkens back to the Monroe Doctrine, which is now the Donroe Doctrine. And for those in your audience that are unaware of what the Monroe Doctrine was, I think it was in 1823 or so, President Monroe in the U.S. struck an agreement with Europe to stay in their lane and other countries, not to interfere with the Western Hemisphere. Well, this is part of the reason why Venezuela was raided, if you will, and Maduro captured, to remove the influence of Russia and China in South America. We have a premier, or a prime minister, that wants to align itself with China. And that brings up a really interesting point. What will the U.S. do about that? And, I don't think we should be speculating because we don't really know. But it is also of interest that the prime minister has indicated that he is intending on pivoting from the U.S. to the European Union. Well, if you saw what Christine Lagarde said recently, and she's the president of the European Central Bank, she said Europe is facing an existential crisis. And she defined what that existential crisis was. And it seems difficult for me to understand Mr. Carney's thinking of why he would want Canada, that's already struggling with an extremely poor economic future under his leadership, to want to align itself, or this country, with Europe, which is facing an existential crisis. It doesn't make sense. But it's part of the rationale, of course, that I think a lot of people are understanding in Alberta, that in order to get out from under this kind of thinking, that the only path forward, the only sensible path forward, is for Alberta to become a sovereign country. And that's gratifying for me to see the turnout at these very few events that we've just started. But it's growing rapidly.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you've put a lot of time and effort into this, so have many other people, your volunteers as well. You've got many out there wanting to make this happen. I want to know, when was the first time you put it, because it's very serious. You guys have had to go through a lot of process. You've had some setbacks. When was the first time you got a smile on your face because you realized this is going to be good? I want to know that moment in time. What did you see? What were you listening to? What did you hear? Did someone share a clip, a video clip or something? Or like, when was the first moment you got a smile on your face and you thought, this is going really good?
Well, I've had many smiles on my face over the past 4 years as we've overcome a variety of hurdles. But if we're talking specifically about the petition campaign, I think it's when I heard that at a small town, I think it's Waterfall, that has a population of about 70 or 80 people, and there were 700 people that showed up at the town hall. I think that brought a smile to my face. And I really had, when I was up in Fort McMurray the other day with Mitch, we got a call from Adele in Red Deer. And if you just heard the enthusiasm in her voice, that people were lined up inside and around the block for miles. They were taking signatures from 12:30 in the afternoon, and they were still going at 7:30 at night. So and that went on till I think around 10 o'clock. Yeah, I think it brings up a really, really interesting thing point. I think we may have discussed this before as well. But when you see what's happening on the ground, it's very different than what the polls tell you, okay? And the polls clearly are not accurate. They weren't accurate in the US election. They weren't accurate in the Newfoundland, Labrador recent election. And we live in this era of cancel culture, particularly as a result of the trucker convoy where people had their accounts frozen. And oftentimes in a poll, people will simply not respond to the poll, or will not say exactly how they feel, or they just hang up the phone, or they don't answer the online survey. So this to me is very gratifying, because I think there's a lot more people that want out from under federal regulation, oppressive federal regulation and taxation and corruption than a lot of people know. And one poll that is really important to understand is every federal election. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Central and Northern BC always vote different from the rest of the country. And I think we're going to see that reflected in this petition campaign and then in the referendum. People are fed up.
Yeah. What are the arguments that the opposition is making? The critics, the naysayers. What are you hearing? Anything that's recently been popping up, and where do their arguments fall short, in your opinion?
Well, let me put it this way. Just to give you an example of the problem, is that Keith Wilson has offered to debate Thomas Lukasik. Thomas Lukasik won't debate with Keith. Do you know why? Because he has no hard data, no evidence to refute everything that we are stating, okay? There's been no credible argument, for example, refuting the Value of Freedom document, which is on our website. It's pretty clear to everybody what the federal government is doing. And if you take how our provincial government is responding to the federal government, some 19 lawsuits have been launched against the federal government in the areas of the development and transport of natural resources, agricultural restrictions on farmers and ranchers, censorship and property rights. Okay, so that's out there. That you cannot refute that, because those are attacks coming from the federal government against our individual freedoms and rights and our ability to prosper. You can't argue with the fact that we give $70 to $75 billion every year to Ottawa, but we only get back 25 to 30 billion. You can't argue with that because those are numbers that come directly from Statistics Canada and Statistics Alberta, as well as research reports from the Fraser Institute and the Frontier Center for Public Policy out of Winnipeg. So it makes it difficult for the other side to argue, and so they can only resort to one ad hominem attacks on individuals, and the only other thing that they can bring up are statements such as it's treasonous. Well, it isn't. It doesn't seem to be treasonous in Quebec. Quebec's been dealing with people who want Quebec sovereignty for decades now, and it's part of the public discussion. Nobody is offended by the discussion, so people shouldn't be offended here in Alberta by the same sort of discussion. One of the arguments that I think is easily refuted is the issue of, veterans will say, we fought for Canada in 2 world wars. And yes, that's true, but were they fighting for Canada or were they fighting for freedom? Because when they were storming the beaches of Normandy, for example, they were fighting for freedom. And they knew the risk. The risk was a bullet in the head or being subjugated by the Nazis, right? So people in Alberta are fighting for freedom as well. They're fighting for the freedom from the oppression by the federal government. And it's important to recognize that the attempted arguments from the people who oppose sovereignty don't hold water. When you look at what the Supreme Court has stated about the right for any province's people to leave Canada, if they have evidence that they've been, and this is the exact terminology by the Supreme Court, there's evidence that they've been subjugated, dominated, exploited, or their self-determination inhibited. And it's pretty clear there's all kinds of evidence that has been the case. So there's ample justification for wanting something different. And, we would love to be able to debate people, prominent individuals, in a public forum regarding their position of remaining in Canada versus our position that the very best thing to save the rest of Canada is for Alberta and very likely Saskatchewan to become sovereign countries. And it forces in the rest of Canada for people to wake up and recognize they have to start looking after themselves. They have to start recognizing that the money that is going to the federal government is simply being used to corrupt the political process, as Paul St. Pierre Plamondon, the leader of the Parti Québécois, has stated. We need to get out from under that. Every province needs to get out from under that, so that their economy can boom, and they can also benefit from lower taxes and having greater purchasing power, and the cost of goods and services dropping as well as a result of getting out from under federal regulation and taxation. It's interesting because when we met with Mr. Plamondon in roughly mid-September, and he gave us a document. Let me see if I have it. I can show you. Yeah, here it is here. You can see that.
Yeah.
There you go. This is a document very similar to our Value of Freedom document. And what it demonstrates is that if Quebec is out from under all federal regulation and taxation, their fiscal capacity surplus will far exceed the amount of money that they're receiving in equalization. So they don't need equalization as a sovereign country because they're not paying to the federal government all the money that is wasted. So it's a really good question that you asked, Corey. What is the argument that the people who oppose sovereignty would advance? There is no good argument, and you can only talk about emotional ties to Canada. I was born in Canada, raised in Canada. I'm Canadian. But the reality is that the Canada that we once knew no longer really exists.
Yeah.
And and many people have awakened to that and have awakened to the idea, gee, their quality of life could be far better. Their cost of living could be far less. They can be far better able to plan for their retirement and look after their kids, etc. in a sovereign Alberta, where rather than paying 43% taxes, you're paying 10% or less, and the cost of goods and services is less. So there's no way that the people who oppose sovereignty can actually argue against that, except for ideological reasons. If you're a Marxist or a communist and you believe in central authority and central authority controlling the manufacture of goods and services and its distribution, well, that's an ideology that we who believe in sovereignty at the individual level and at the regional level, when Alberta becomes a sovereign country, is a very different perspective. And from my point of view, the people that want to live in a society that is a collective society, they should move to that location.
Yeah.
Where they think they may be more comfortable, but they will not be better off financially, that's for sure.
Is healthcare an issue when people are discussing sovereignty?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand that the Canadian healthcare system functions in the lowest quartile of quality at the highest quartile of cost on numerous metrics. The idea of Medicare is a great idea. Medicare is not going anywhere, even in a sovereign Alberta. But Medicare can be improved substantively. Medicare can learn from the efficiencies that derive from the private system. And there isn't going to be a two-tier system when you have a proper running Medicare system and a proper running private healthcare system. I mean, there's private healthcare that's occurring in Canada and Alberta already. But if you take the tenets of the Canada Health Act, none of them are being respected uniformly in every province in the country. Everybody's doing, somewhat their own thing. My view, as from the point of view of a retired cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon, is that I want to see the healthcare system be dramatically improved and have our costs better accounted for, and solve the problems of access to the system and improve quality. I mean, it's the other thing to think when I made the point that the healthcare system in Canada functions in the lowest quartile of quality at the highest quartile of cost. The other thing is that the fourth most common cause of death is medical errors. So these are things that the public is little educated about, and the mainstream media, of course, isn't going to talk about those kinds of things, but that's the reality. So we have tremendous opportunities to improve healthcare. We have opportunities to improve education, opportunities to improve social services, solve the problems of the homeless. And we can do that far better when we have complete control of that $70 to $75 billion that we give to Ottawa every year and use it for the benefit of Albertans through the lowering of taxes and the improvement of social programs such as healthcare, infrastructure, education, homeless, etc.
Yeah. Well, we got like 60 seconds left. I want to ask you this last question because I know Alan and I have been misunderstood many times in our life of what we're trying to do and accomplish. I want to throw to you, is there one common misunderstanding or something that's being misrepresented or interpreted that you want to get across to people of what you're trying to do or what your hope is for this movement? Is there any misunderstanding that you want to make clear that that's out there?
Well, if there's maybe a couple of things I could cite. One is that, as I've said earlier, this is not a right or a left issue. This is a pragmatic issue that benefits everybody, and they need to understand. They need to be educated so that they know what the benefits are. The other thing that's very important to understand is that what we're not advocating for at all is joining the United States. Why would we want to jump from the CRA to the IRS, for example, when we can virtually be completely out from under all taxation, including property tax in a few years after becoming a sovereign nation? So I think, it's important to dispel that myth, because I know that Mr. Lukasik, when his team was going into the nursing homes, he was posing the question, not do you want to remain in Canada, but do you want to remain in Canada or join the US? And that was very misleading, but
Right.
That's not the way, we, from an education point of view, we want to be able to educate the public on the rationale and merits of sovereignty, how to make it happen with evidence. Okay, so we're not providing anything that we can't back up, whereas Mr. Lukasik and those who oppose Alberta sovereignty can't do the same.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time. We really appreciate you. We're definitely going to have you back. This conversation's not going away. In fact, I think a lot of people are surprised what's happening. And as I said before, I think there's a lot of closet separatists that are coming out, standing in line in the snow to get their name on that petition, because I think it's they see value in it. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. We'll definitely have you back.
Thank you for the invite, and enjoy the rest of the day. Talk to you next time.
Well, that's always a great conversation. And for those that want more information, you can go to stayfreealberta.com. That's stayfreealberta.com. That gives you all the latest information, where they're going to be, popping up in order for people to get their signatures in. And Alan, it's interesting time. It's exciting, right?
It is. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think I'm happy to hear that Albertans are stepping up to the plate.
Yeah, for sure. Giving away a free booklet called Living in Truth. It's a devotional study on 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. It's yours absolutely free. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com/resources, fill out the form. We'll send one to you in the mail. You want to help support our mission, keep this conversation in truth on the air. We are viewer supported. We don't take government funds, special interest groups. It's just because of the generosity of those that watch this show, we're able to continue. If you'd like to partner with us, you can go to our website, www.talktruth.com/donate. That's www.gotalktruth.com/donate. Many different ways to give digitally that way. If you'd like to do it through the mail, you can. You can send it to Talk Truth at 246 Stewart Green, Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H3C8. If you like prayer or you want to donate by phone, you can call our 800 number, 1-800-915-0056 in Canada. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.